Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar discussing whole farm revenue protection policies. My name is Natalie Collins, and I am the Manager of Member Relations for COG and will act as the moderator on today's call. With harvest recently wrapping up, it is now time to start planning for next year. An important part of your 2018 planning process is managing the risk of your crop, and whole farm revenue protection may be a good solution for your operation. Presenting today will be Christine Fox, an account executive with Pan American Insurance Agency. Since Pan American's founding in 1946, they have emerged as the premier provider of quality insurance products and services to California's wine industry. For over a decade, COG has endorsed Pan American to deliver competitive quality insurance to our members with exceptional customer service. Pan American and QBE Country have been great supporters of COG and the entire wine grape industry. We thank both Pan American and QBE for their continued support and outstanding service to the industry. Now, real quick, I want to go over the format of the webinar. We will begin with a 30 to 45-minute presentation and then open it up for questions and answers. Please feel free to type and submit your questions as we go. All questions are anonymous, so I will not use any names when reading them. This webinar will be recorded, so I will send everybody on the call a link after the presentation is concluded. I will also send everybody two fact sheets, one provided by USDA and the other provided by Pan American. I also want to remind all COG members on the line, if you have further questions after this webinar regarding whole farm revenue protection or crop insurance policies in general, please do not hesitate to reach out to Christine and the Pan American team, and they will be able to further assist you. So now, without further delay, I will turn the presentation over to Christine.
Thank you, Natalie. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. As Natalie mentioned, my name is Christine Fox. I work for Pan American Insurance. I have been in the crop insurance industry for about 7 years, both as an agent and I worked on the company side for a little while. This is my handy disclaimer here. Anything in this webinar is for training purposes only. It's not to supersede the policy provisions. So what is whole farm revenue? This provides coverage for all commodities under one crop insurance policy. We utilize the farming operations revenue from farming. It does not include revenue from post-harvest operations. So once it reaches the winery, it's no longer going to be, we're not going to count the revenue from that portion of it. This can be purchased as a standalone policy or in conjunction with your multi-peril crop insurance policy. It protects against loss of revenue caused by Mother Nature that impacts the commodity's yields or their market price, or a combination of both. You can receive up to 80% premium subsidy if you are a diversified farmer under the whole farm policy. For most on the call, the important thing to note that as of 2018, grapes have been categorized into 2 different crops. So this helps you become more diversified on your farming operations. We have white grapes and red grapes now. Previously, a grape was just a grape. The policy premium is strongly impacted by farm diversification. A farmer can still purchase this if they are a single commodity farmer. You just will not receive the 80% subsidy level. What is covered? So all commodities produced during the insurance period, whether they are sold or not sold, are covered under whole farm. This includes commodities that do not currently have a multi-peril crop insurance policy. So if you're growing an oddball crop that maybe doesn't have that current multi-peril crop policy, you can include that under whole farm. This can cover commodities purchased for a resale as well. Revenue losses can be attributed to a decrease in yields or market price, but both must be due to a natural peril. An example for market price loss would be just the recent fires we had in Napa. There was probably some quality adjustments made, and you may not have received the price that you were given on your contract, so that would have been covered under whole farm revenue. If the market price is impacted by a man-made cause, or even your yield losses are impacted by a man-made cause, that would not be covered under whole farm revenue. Annual plants have replant coverage if it's not offered under your multi-peril crop policy. Any carryover insureds, most of you on the call may be new to this program, but if you did have it in the past and you have a loss in revenue, that cause of loss would carry over into the next crop insurance year. This excludes water issues. So if you have a reduction in your irrigation supply that is known, insurance will not be provided due to that. Things excluded under whole farm. So any losses occurring within the first 10 days after the policy is accepted would not be covered. A key thing to point out for this policy for grape growers is that your application deadline for your multi-peril crop insurance is January 31st. The application deadline for whole farm is February 28th for people in California. So you'll want to talk with your agent as soon as possible to get your coverage in place and make sure that you have everything lined out for both policies. Also not covered under the policy are the growers' inability to market due to quarantine, boycott, a lack of labor, failure to secure a buyer, failure to follow a contract requirement, or failure to collect a payment. These are all not going to be covered under whole farm. Any deterioration of your commodity once it's reached the storage facility is also not covered unless something happened at the storage facility and you own that and it was due to natural cause. What you need to know here basically is that this covers the crop or the commodity at its market price or contract value at harvest time for any natural peril. It's not going to cover growers' poor planning or any issues that may arise post-harvest. Exclusions in special circumstances. This policy does not cover any forest products, animals for sport or show, or your pets. And I mentioned earlier that it does cover commodities that are purchased for resale, but your revenue, only 50% of your revenue can come from those commodities. Potato farmers and crops grown with an existing revenue multi-peril crop policy are ineligible if that is the only commodity that you grow. There is a $1 million cap on revenue from animals, animal products, nurseries, and greenhouse operations. This is just a cap, so if you actually do have more revenue from either of those, we can still insure them under the policy, but it's going to cap out at $1 million. If you have a multi-peril crop insurance policy, you cannot have the CAT level of coverage. You either need to purchase a higher level of coverage at the buy-up level or cancel that policy. I'm going to provide an example later of how the underlying multi-peril policy can impact the premium in a positive way for the whole farm. So it's probably better to buy up than to cancel. And again, keep in mind the application deadline for your grapes is earlier than the application deadline for whole farm. So you'll really want to work that out with your agent at the same time. Also, producing a controlled substance is a knockout factor for this policy. So anyone on the call from Mendocino County, I'm sorry to let you know that. Now, why haven't you heard about this? Previously, whole farm was known as a different name. It was adjusted gross revenue, and it was only offered in select counties in California. There were limitations and less coverage options under that policy as well. In 2015, it expanded to all states. This actually resulted in a 385% increase in policy count from 2015 to 2016. For most on the call, again, the biggest change that just happened recently is for 2018, we have now red grapes and white grapes, when previously a grape was just a grape. I mentioned diversification. This impacts your farm diversification, which plays a big part in your coverage options and the subsidy that you receive on your premium. Now, what makes you qualify? A farming entity must have 5 consecutive years of tax returns for the entity you will be insuring, unless you meet some special circumstances. Possibly your entity name changed or your tax ID changed, but the operation did not. Or maybe you purchased a farming operation, and as long as 90% of that operation exists still and remains the same, you can utilize the tax forms from that previous entity under whole farm revenue. Other special cases may come into play if you're a beginning farmer, or possibly you're away in the military and you do not have the 5 consecutive years. You may still be eligible. Talk to your agent to find out if you meet those requirements. And the insurance period for this policy follows the operations tax filing methods. So if you're a fiscal year or a calendar year filer, this is going to follow you. I keep mentioning diversification. Why is that important? This impacts the subsidy qualifications, the potential for a premium discount, the coverage levels available, and the potential for disqualification under whole farm. Growers must meet specific amounts of revenue for a commodity account to count towards the policy diversification, and I'll get into that here in a moment. Again, the policy is highly impacted by the number of commodities that you produce on your farm. So this graph shows you basically where you need to be in regards to your revenue. The third column lists the percentage of revenue needed to meet the diversification requirements. So the key number here for most on the call that only grow grapes is 16.7%. That there has to be more than that, or that amount coming from each commodity in order for you to be considered a two-crop grower, two crops considered for your diversification. The policy now allowing the separation of grapes can help grape producers meet this diversification requirement. So keep that in mind. If you've got maybe 90% of your Cab and 10% in Chardonnay, at that point you would only be considered a one commodity grower under a whole farm. This graph shows the premium subsidies received based off the commodity count. Growers with 2 or more commodities can receive up to 80% subsidy on their premium. Growers with only 1 qualified commodity still receive that premium subsidy. It's just going to be the basic crop insurance subsidy, similar to what you have on your multi-peril crop insurance policy. Also, growers with 3 or more commodities qualify for 80 and 85% coverage level. So again, I just want to point out, if you've got a white grape and a red grape, such as Cab and Chardonnay, you do have to meet those revenue requirements in order to qualify for 2 crops and receive the 80% subsidy. Growers can insure up to $8.5 million under the whole farm policy. You can have more revenue than this, but the policy caps out at $8.5 million. The coverage ranges between 50 and 85% in 5% increments, similar to the multi-peril crop insurance policy. That coverage level or percentage represents a percent of the farming revenue the policy will be insuring. Because there is an $8.5 million cap, this graph basically just shows the maximum total revenue under the operation that would be insured. So at 50% coverage level, your max revenue from farming allowed under the whole farm policy would be $17 million. Half of that is $8.5 million. So what do we use to determine your insured revenue? Well, the policy uses either the 5-year average revenue determined by the farmer's tax returns or the expected revenue from farming for the insurance year, whichever is lower. This amount is then taken and multiplied by the grower's selected coverage level percentage to determine the policy's insured revenue. I'm going to go through some examples here for you. In this example, I have a Lodi grape grower, and this is just laying out what they expect for the 2018 crop year. So they've got their Cab, 120 acres, 7.2 tons per acre, and a contracted price of $5,000 per ton, which gives them $4,320,000 in estimated revenue. Then they have Chardonnay out there, 100 acres at 6.8 tons per acre, and they've got that contracted for $1,500 per ton. And we've got their estimated revenue for their Chardonnay at $1,020,000. And then maybe they've got a little block of olives out there, 20 acres. They anticipate 150 gallons per acre at $18 per gallon. So you've got $54,000 in estimated revenue for a grand total of $5,394,000. Now we're going to go and look at the tax forms. The policy uses the Schedule F. So if you've got a K-1 or other profit and loss tax form, it would need to be transferred into a substitute Schedule F for the policy. Also note, there is a lag year where we don't use the most recent tax year for the policy, because this policy will probably you'll already have signed up for it before you have actually filed your taxes for the year. So we look at the 5 years, we get the average off of that, and then we compare the two. So we've got the average revenue and the expected revenue for 2018, and it's going to pick the lower of the two. In this example, the lower of the two is the expected commodity revenue. Now we have to determine the commodity count towards the policy so we can find out how diversified this farmer is. For this, I broke it down to red grapes or white grapes, and then we've got the olives. Because the olives make a small portion of the revenue, they're not going to count towards the commodity count. So in this example, this grower only has 2 commodities to count towards their diversification. I also want to point out that if you have different varieties of red grapes and different varieties of white grapes, we are going to break it out and find out how much of your expected revenue comes from each, but then it's going to get lumped into either red grapes or white grapes to account towards your diversification factor. The grower then gets to select their desired coverage level. So as I mentioned before, we can't have 80 or 85% coverage for anybody who grows 2 or less commodities. So those are knocked out right off the bat. For this example, let's say the grower decides to select 75% coverage. I also want to point out the premiums listed here are for a grower who has purchased a multi-peril crop insurance policy at the 50% level. And I'll get into a comparison here on how it looks with or without that policy. So as I just mentioned, here it is. So the top portion shows what they're insuring under their multi-peril crop insurance policy. Remember, if you look at the insurance price for losses under the multi-peril crop policy, the grower is only going to receive $1,310 per ton for his cab and $990 per ton for the Chardonnay. But if you remember from a previous slide, this grower actually has a contract price of $5,000 per ton for the cab and $1,500 per ton for the Chardonnay. So there is a gap there in coverage on the multi-peril crop policy. We go and we look at the total liability for the multi-peril crop policy. That $902,520 is their underlying liability. So the bottom two graphs show with multi-peril and without. And because they have that $902,520 in additional liability helping out on the field, they actually receive a premium discount for their whole farm revenue policy. So the total premium was $35,201 compared to not having the multi-peril crop policy, which the premium then is $45,310. So for this example, the multi-peril policy, having that in conjunction with the whole farm policy, you actually get a 22.4% decrease in premium. So let's talk about the claim and how that all plays out. These were the grower's expectations and what they anticipated as far as their expected revenue for 2018. This is, let's just say, what the grower actually produced. Something happened out on the field. They only received 400 tons of their cab when they expected 864 tons. So their revenue took an impact or a hit on that part. This was just kind of to recap what their insured revenue was. We had the approved revenue multiplied by their coverage level to give them their insured revenue. So we take what they actually had. Now for this example, remember the grower had a multi-peril crop insurance policy, and because their Cabernet was so highly impacted, they actually got paid on their multi-peril claim. So we'll take that revenue and also count it for the year. And I also want to point out that your multi-peril crop insurance policy will typically be paid out prior to you receiving any kind of claim payment for your whole farm policy, because the whole farm policy claims cannot be adjusted until after you filed your taxes for the crop year. So now we have a total revenue to count with what you actually received out in the field, plus your multi-peril claim payment of $2,953,020. So we're going to take your insured revenue, subtract what you actually have as your revenue to count, and $1,092,480 is your revenue loss for this example. That would be your indemnity payment under your whole farm revenue protection policy. If they did not have that multi-peril crop insurance policy, this would have picked up that additional $41,920. But again, keep in mind you did receive a premium discount for purchasing that underlying insurance. You need to file your claims timely, as all crop insurance policies. You have 72 hours, or you want to do that within 72 hours of notice of potential damage or a loss in your revenue. Again, claims are paid after you filed your taxes for the year. And if you do file your taxes and notice that there's a significant revenue impact, you have 60 days after filing to notify the company of a revenue loss. But again, that does have to be due to a natural peril. The application deadline for this policy is February 28th for California operations. If you happen to be headquartered in a different state, You'll talk to your insurance agent about what your deadline date is, because it does vary. And then we do have to collect a revised farm operation report on or before July 15th, or if you're a late fiscal filer, no later than October 31st. This can be compared to your acreage report that you have to submit later for your multi-peril crop insurance policy. We get the policy in January, and we follow up later to determine what your acres are. Growers' responsibilities. You do have to provide necessary documentation for the policy. Any Schedule Fs or substitute Schedule Fs for the past 5 years need to be provided. Any organic certificates, supporting documentation regarding your lack of having a 5-year history, maybe because you're a beginning farmer. Also, the liability amounts for your underlying multi-peril crop insurance policy need to be supplied if you've purchased that. You do not need to purchase your whole farm policy from the same agent that you've purchased your multi-peril crop insurance policy from. So just keep that in mind. If you want to work with somebody who's more of an expert on this policy, you can go to them and still have your multi-peril crop policy with another agency. Growers also need to notify your agent of any changes to the farming operation throughout the insurance year, and you do need to retain your records for 3 years. So in conclusion, this policy ensures a grower's actual revenue from farming. Anything post-harvest is not included in this. It is a highly subsidized policy for a diversified farmer. And if you have a CPA or a CFO, agents can work direct with that person to determine if this policy is a good fit for your farming operation. But what you need to know is it is a complex policy, so you want to make sure you work with somebody who understands the policy and procedures. So I think I wrapped that up under the 30-minute mark, so hopefully that was good for everybody else, but I will pass it along back to Natalie.
Thank you very much, Christine. At this time, we are open for any questions. There is the question tab on your dashboard. Feel free to type them in there. Christine, can you go over real quick the deadlines for signing up for whole farm revenue?
Certainly. You'll want to have the application needs to be completed by February 28th. Again, for anybody who's on the call that's a grape grower, or actually most commodities, if you have a multi-peril crop insurance policy, you may want to just sign up for this or get things started at the same time, because your underlying multi-peril crop policy can affect and will affect your whole farm. But February 28th is kind of the end-all be-all for California growers.
Perfect. And do you determine commodity prices similar as you would for whole farm as you do for normal crop insurance?
We do, and then we would utilize any contract prices for the whole farm side, whereas on the multi-peril crop insurance policies, there is a cap as far as how high we can go. If you have a contract, we can only go 2 times higher than the insurance price. So just keep that in mind, but we would utilize your contracts for that or any of the fair market prices out there for your area.
Perfect. And you can do organic pricing for this as well?
Yes, you can.
Perfect. And where does Pan American have offices located, or are they just in the Fresno area?
No, we have offices all over California. There's one in Stockton, Sacramento, Fresno, down in Palm Desert. I think we have about 11 offices.
Very good. Okay, let's see. Do we have any more questions? All right, at this time, I'm not seeing any more questions, but as I did mention before, if you guys have any follow-up questions on whole farm or just crop insurance in general, feel free to contact Christine at Pan American. They have a great team to work with, and they're always available for questions. And actually, we just got one more question in. Can the policy be assigned to a lender as additional insured who is providing crop lines?
I believe it can. I know on your multi-peril crop insurance policy you can, so I would assume that it would go with this. I can come back and check in the rules, but I'm about 90% positive it can, and then I can email you, Natalie, just to be sure.
Yeah, okay, we can include that, follow up the answer to that in the email I send you guys with this recording. All right. I do not see any more questions at this time, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us on this webinar. And Christine, thank you once again for presenting on this topic today.
Thank you for allowing me the time. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.